Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about the Edition Wars. So this is Scott Garibay reporting to you as an embedded reporter on the front lines of the Dungeons and Dragons Edition Wars. Now, the reason why I'm reporting you today is I've heard some ridiculous nonsense on some other channels that the Edition Wars are over. It's all D&D, right? Ridiculous. I'll tell you right now, the Edition Wars are quite alive, and there are salvos being thrown in lots of directions. And the Edition Wars are quite robust and quite alive. So let's explore it today. All right. So first of all of this is in context to D&D 5th edition. First of all, currently right now the edition wars are very much alive, right? Like there are a lot of people who care a lot about what edition of Dungeons and Dragons that you're playing. And there's lots of commentators out there to tell you that it doesn't matter what edition of Dungeons and Dragons you're playing. We're all united and it's all, good fun together. We're all playing the same game. I think that's nonsense, all right? So first of all, if you are playing an edition, there's very good reasons why people care about the editions and why the edition wars continue. Right now, first of all, why some people are not are comfortable with the edition wars. Right, I am comfortable with the edition wars with the following caveat. Right, so I think that edition wars is for pride, not prize. Okay. So there is a little bit of prize in here. We'll talk about that in a minute. But I think overall the edition words are for pride, right? So basically everybody's proud of their own edition that they think is the best edition of Dungeons and Dragons, and they want others to play that edition of Dungeons and Dragons. And the stakes are real. This isn't like, oh, you play yours, I'll play mine, everything's great, blah blah blah, zero sum. Actually, the people who don't believe in the edition wars are people who are like, it's not a zero sum game. It is a zero sum game. People want your players, right? Like there's only a limited number of players out there, and dungeon masters are competing to get the most players or the best players. And if you don't care, guess what? You're going to have fewer players or you're going to have worse players. Because the people who care about the edition wars are going to get the best players and get the most players. So the edition wars are quite alive. Right? Like the Dungeons and Dragons edition wars are quite alive. I'll tell you that right now, right? So this idea that we're all just playing D&D, it's all the same, it's utter nonsense, okay? The stakes are who gets the most players, who gets the best players, okay? In addition to this, for Wizards of the Coast, for Hasbro Gaming, the edition wars have very real consequences, okay? If you're playing an older version of D&D, right, they don't get a lot of money from that. At best, they're going to get you to buy the PDF copies on DM Skill or on Drive Through RPG. They don't even get all of that money a lot of times. People find other ways to get old games, right? Which I'm not supporting. I don't think that's good. You should definitely buy the official PDF. But what's a PDF? Like $5-10, right? Whereas if you're playing the current game, you're going to drop minimum $100 and probably $150 to maybe $1,000 on books, right? And if you're playing the current, you could be buying hardbacks, and you could be buying well more than PDFs. You could be buying the D&D Beyond. So the stakes on this are like if everybody's playing D&D, like this idea that it's all the same. The commentators spout this nonsense. Like thinking about the words that come out of your mouth for once. If you're commentating on D&D, think about the words that come out of your mouth. There are real stakes. The edition wars are quite real. They are raging right now. Okay, and there are real stakes in the game. For Hasbro and Wizards of the Coast, it's quite real, right? It's like, do we pay our top designer $55,000, or does the top designer, does the design lead of D&D make $250,000? Those are very real stakes, right? Like that's ramen or steak for dinner. Like that's real stakes, right? Like, and it is very real. The edition wars are quite real, like So the idea that the edition wars are over is absolutely ludicrous. The edition wars are absolutely going forward. What should be the scope of the edition wars? I'll give you the scope of the edition wars. The Dungeons and Dragons edition wars, the scope of it should be the following. It should be conversations between real dungeon masters, real players, right? it should be social media conversations that are done in the following way. Okay, um, no cursing, no name calling, right? But absolutely, like verbal smackdowns from the like, oh, my point is valid and your point looks ridiculous, right? So like, if somebody, and I do think that there should be a discourse that happens. And there should be winners and losers in that discourse. Conversations can have winners and losers, right? And there's no blood lost. Like, this is all simply conversation. I think it should be all respectful conversation that ends with a verbal victory and then verbal embarrassment. Like you lost. Like, your point is, like, you said that there were no stakes in the game. The addition wars aren't real, right? You were 100% wrong. Right? Like, it's so clear now that, like, you were wrong, that there are real stakes in the game, right? The stakes are, the only people who believe the addition wars are done and that there's no stakes in the game are people who don't understand that they are competing for the most players, the best players, and for Hasbro, the stakes are quite real, right? Like money on the line real, right? And this determines how good is the art for the game, how good is the design for the game, all these things. What do they have the money to do, right? And is D&D financially viable? Those are all stakes of the edition wars, and so the D&D edition wars are on. There are and this conversation is being, and now I will say this: it should never, the edition wars should never go beyond verbal conversations in any way, right? And no one should ever raise their voice. No one should be, ever call any names. There's no, none of that. But, like, we could still have conversations that we have winners and losers, and that's what the edition wars are at this point. They're a conversation with winners and losers. And if anybody out there is telling you, "Oh, the edition wars are over. We're all playing D&D," that is not true, right? Absolutely not true. That's my opinion. I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think the edition wars are over? There's a lot of D&D commentators saying this, saying the edition wars are over, that there's no stakes in the game. Doesn't matter what you're playing. I say that's nonsense. Am I wrong? Am I right? Let me know in the comments below. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.